Hi, everyone. Hold on. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Kimberly Cloud Show. I'm your host, Kimberly Cloud. I have a very special guest here for the show today. Can you go ahead and announce to the world who you are?
Thanks, Kimberly, for having me on. My name is Ken Stearns.
Hi, Ken. We talked behind stage and it was a wonderful conversation. I just wanted to ask you a little bit about your past. If you would like to dig in for like 10, 15 minutes talking about your past, that would be great.
Sure, sure. Well, in one of my bios, I refer myself as a well-seasoned Midwestern kid.
Mm-hmm.
And, kind of what I mean by that is I'm a Chicago suburban native. Well-seasoned meaning, I'm more than 60. And a kid meaning I'm still a kid at heart. Still approach life and everything I do with that youthful view. Try to keep that childhood wonderment about me as I go through life. And that served me well. I ended up went to school in South Carolina, got a degree in accounting, and ended up in California. My sister convinced me to come out to Huntington Beach for a week in between my when I graduated and starting a master's program. And well, that was all she wrote. Before I knew it, I was in California, got married, had a couple of kids, and started an insurance career. After a couple of, kind of some funny backstories in there, but essentially I ended up as an insurance guy. And I had a particular experience in insurance distribution, selling to employers and then talking to the employees about their insurance needs. And that led me to an opportunity in Asia. So in 2001, I packed up my house and took my family, my wife and two kids, to my two daughters, to Hong Kong, and spent 22 years in Asia. And ultimately, I lived in four countries there. I lived in Hong Kong, I lived in Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, India, and ended up back in Vietnam before I came back to the States. So I really enjoyed a really interesting, say not just the career, but an interesting life outside the U.S. It's a place where there's a lot going on in Asia, and just like America, every corner is a little bit different. We talk about Asia, and I think Americans, we look at Asia and it's just one big human, one big impression. And the reality is, there's a lot of countries there and a lot of cultures, a lot of languages. Food is very different. Even within, I stayed more than 5 years. I lived more than 5 years in Vietnam, and I'd been traveling there for probably more than 20. I was
Tell
still
me
having
about the
new,
food. Tell me about the
yeah,
food.
I was just going to say, I was still having new dishes on my fifth year. And it just blew my mind that this dish would come in the table and they'd put it down and I'd go, what is that? I knew kind of it was an iteration of something, but the northern culture, the southern culture, the highlands, up at the hills, and then down to the coastal side. They really had these four regions, if you break it up into big regions, and they all had the food. And then within there, Kimberly, there were so many iterations of how they serve the food and everything else. And it's just the best food in Asia is Vietnamese.
Okay.
Yeah, my own experience, my own preference. And
Is it
Indonesia,
spicy, salty, sweet?
all of those in the same meal. And sometimes they'd have dipping sauces. One dish with four or five sauces you could dip in. And I'm a dipper. I love dipping sauce. Love give me some dips. And they've got dips. Indonesia has great food, lovely food. Indonesia's this, so much of an Indian influence from the traders from a long time ago. The Dutch were there for as colonists for 400 years, something. And then, of course, the Malay, the original cultural people there. Just amazing food in Indonesia and around that area, Malaysia. And then India, magic. The food there is magic. But I really did have, not just an amazing career, but a chance to meet people and and to see things that I never would have thought I'd see. Um, and I got to live. This is an interesting antidote. Is I when I wrote my book, I wrote in the summary there that I I've lived in the largest Christian country in the world. I've lived in the largest Hindu country, the largest Buddhist country, the largest Islamic country, and the largest country that has no religious belief, no official religious belief, no
Really?
China and Hong Kong. So
Wow.
China, really, there's no religion. There's zero religion. There is no, really, there's no God. There's country, family, yourself. So it gave me this point of spirituality where I believed in everything. I really believed in all that, the religions that I lived in, and listened to what the locals believe in, and the traditions and everything. And it's easy to believe and understand what they follow. But also at the same time, when you do that one, two, three, 4, 5 times, you also learn to believe in everything and nothing at the same time.
And I mean, like the culture there, like were there polite people? Were they busy? Did they want to engage
Hmm.
in conversation? Do they know English?
Yeah. A lot of almost every country I was in, English is at an executive level, at a well-educated level. English is pretty strong. You can find quite a few people to engage in deep conversations with English. A lot of people educated overseas. A lot of the older generations were educated overseas before the '87 financial crisis, the 97 financial crisis, which impacted a lot of Asian currencies. So people came home, but that whole pre part, a lot of those people were educated overseas. So English was quite good. I have to say, Kimberly, amazing people. All the countries, super friendly people, very interested to meet an American or to talk to an American, very curious. Uh, I look back, lovely, lovely interactions, and I really had never any really negative experiences that I can remember.
How was their
Very safe as well, very safe.
how was their television shows? Was it a little different?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, the television was on another planet. It was from another era. And very, obviously it's all local stuff, and a lot of the stuff, no idea what's going on, right? I couldn't understand. Watching Vietnamese TV, I just put my hands. I don't know. Cantonese shows in Hong Kong, they have it in local language, Cantonese, Thailand's, you know. But it's funny, they all love the Korean dramas. And the Korean dramas were all translated to the local language. So
Were
that was
you
one thing
there?
you could always count on.
Were you there for the COVID?
I was there for COVID. I landed in Vietnam in, I think it was January-ish of the year. And boom, they closed the door behind me. Vietnam was extremely aggressive. They locked the country. They closed the door. The borders were closed. Nobody in and nobody out. Like you couldn't, like they were very difficult to get a repatriation flight. So for you, if you're a Japanese person, to get back to Japan took a lot of effort to get out of the country, um, and nearly impossible to get in. Very difficult to get in. So but what that afforded us during the first phase of COVID was it afforded us freedom within the country. So while America was locked down, I had a very regular life inside Vietnam. Strange. You wore masks and stuff, and there wasn't a vaccine available, so nobody had a vax. No one was worried about who was vaxxed and who wasn't. Um, and you just went about life, and you just kind of, was fairly cautious. And they had almost no, very, very few. I mean, their management of finding a case was not pretty. It's a communist country, so if they found, some stories, they found a hospital with two people with COVID on this fourth floor, and they just chained every door in the hospital. And if you were visiting somebody or you were a service person or whatever, in that moment when they put the locks on, you were done for 2 weeks. They just locked you
What was the
in.
turning point that said that you wanted to just go back to the mainland, the United States of America?
Hmm. I was I was about 52, and I was asking myself the question, what does my life look like when I'm 75? who am I when I'm 75? Where am I and what am I
You look
doing?
good for
Oh,
your
thank you.
age.
Well, I'm 62 now. I'm not 75. Yeah. But um, so I was trying to figure out what does that look like? Who am I? What am I doing? And I realized that, I wanted to do something where I could share my life experiences, um, and share some of let's say mostly really my life experiences and maybe my wisdom. Hopefully I've got some wisdom by now. And to get on a stage and do that as a public speaker. And as we were talking offline, ended up writing a book called Dear God and Letters to God. And so it was me taking taking time to write a letter to God and saying, "Do I understand this? I think I understand what is love. Isn't love this?" And each topic had four letters. So love, for example, the conversation with love was, isn't self-love the most important love? Isn't that the love we need to have first? And if I learn to love myself, then the next letter was, can I love another person? When I love myself, can I share that love with somebody else? Can I love somebody else? And the third one is, can I receive love? Because that's a different angle, right? Loving somebody and being able to accept love. And so the premise is you got to love yourself first, and then only then can you love somebody and accept love. And then the last one was, if you've got those three, you're going to be capable to teach love. It's difficult to teach love if you're not at a loving place already. So I went through that with 12 topics. I call them yesterdays, todays, and tomorrows, your past, present, your future, acceptance, forgiveness, compassion, love, karma, and service. And the last part was faith, hope, and prayer. And so there was organized in four parts. And the first part is yourself, your past and present and future, everything in your brain, right? All the things that we spin around in our head, thinking about the unpredictable future and the determined past that we can't change. And then the next part was between you and I, acceptance, forgiveness, and compassion. When it's a one-on-one kind of relationship, those are things you need to have, skills. And when you get to the kind of the larger community, you're outside of those two, outside the two of us, love, karma, and service. Having that loving heart, leaving things and people better than you found them with karma, and go out with a service-minded heart. Have a heart that is service-minded, right? And I thought that was from a larger perspective. And then the last one, kind of, if those are three circles, concentric going out, you square that off with the faith, hope, and prayer. And
Have
so
you
that was the
ever
Dear God book.
have you ever thought about speaking at large events?
Yeah, I love the opportunity. And one of the things I was very lucky, very fortunate in my career, I was on the distribution side, agency, life insurance distribution. And that afforded me an opportunity to speak a lot in front of audiences, big and small. Sometimes it'd be five people, just to have a pep talk, to share, and audiences, 12,000 in a room,
Well,
to speak and motivate, and to share strategy papers or strategy documents, or to talk about results, or some tips, ideas that I might share with an agency. So yeah, I've had the opportunity, but now I want to bring those skills and bring those opportunities to US and share a little bit about what I've done and been doing.
have you ever thought about getting on TEDx and doing book signings for your show? I mean, your
Yeah,
we haven't dug into your show yet. Your book.
yeah, yeah. I played around with it. It was kind of a strange thing. For some reason, I had this trepidation around the title of the book, as we talked about earlier, right? And it's my own kind of hang up. I think that, it's funny how I even look at my own book and my own title. And I really would like to get into some book signing. I'm kind of growing into the book now more and more, and realizing, I'm pretty proud of it, and something that I never imagined I would do. it became a labor of burden for a long time writing it. And it only takes, I think, takes some time to have some reflection and to look back and to be more proud of it and realize it is something I should go around and promote a bit more and get behind. And I think I also got quite distracted with my podcast. I had a I had a I had a little bit too much going on all at the same time.
Did you take your book and, well, the podcast, let's talk about the podcast. We're in the present now. You have a podcast
Hmm.
and you have a book. Tell me a little bit
Yeah.
more about the podcast.
Yeah, and it's a great transition, Kimberly, because they're kind of intertwined.
Hmm.
When I was writing the book, I was boy, I started it in Vietnam. Or I started it in Thailand when I was living in Thailand, and the structure of it. And there's kind of a backstory to it. Let me tell the backstory since we've got
Yeah,
an hour. I'll
yeah,
tell the
yeah.
backstory because I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting. So I mentioned to you offline, that I was asking, or on the show, that I was asking myself, what do I want to be when I'm 75? What am I doing? And one of the things that for whatever reason, I'm not sure. Sometimes things come to you, and I thought unfinished business for me was playing guitar. It was unfinished. I had a guitar when I was a kid in parochial school, and I gave it up for the trumpet. And later, when I was in Asia, I bought another guitar. I was seriously intending on taking up less, and I I lent it to somebody for a weekend, and I never saw it again.
Whoa.
and and so I decided I'm going to buy me a guitar. I'm 52. I'm going to get a guitar. I had a nice bonus, and I was home from Thailand, and I thought I'm going to get a guitar. I'm going to do it. It's unfinished business, and I'm going to try. And I'm going to spend real money. I'm going to spend stupid money on a guitar. And the reason I'm going to do that is because I'm going to commit to 2 years, and I'm going to get lessons every Sunday, and I'm going to do the lessons for 2 years. I'm going to try, and at the end of 2 years, I'll make a decision: keep going or sell the guitar. But I gotta commit, and that's how I can justify spending some nice money. So I found myself in a Las Vegas Guitar Center store, and I was really, I'm like so excited, right? I drive in, I'm like, oh, the big store, and and I go into this Guitar Center store, and I get into the guitar room, and it's so intimidating. I realize I don't know anything about guitars. Of course, I've owned two and I've played them, but I don't know anything really, truly to buy a guitar. And I didn't know what I was looking for. And I started to kind of doubt myself, and I started to kind of thinking maybe I'll look around. I'll just buy, maybe I'll look online. So I started having those doubts. And there was one gentleman that was kind of walking around, and it's this big kind of horseshoe with, probably 200 guitars in the room, 200 on the walls and in the middle of this island. And this one guy is just sitting there, and he's almost got like this aura. He's moving around, and he'd sit down, he'd play guitar, put it up, and I kind of noticed him. And all of a sudden, I'm face to face like you and I are.
Mhm.
And I look at him and I'm like, hi, my name's Ken, and I want to buy a guitar, and I've never really played before. And, I just wondered, like, could you give me some advice? And he looks at me and he goes, get the red one. And, what does it mean? And he looks at me and he says, the one you can't take your eyes off, the one you see across a crowded room, the one you want to hold and never let go. I thought, wow. And I didn't realize how prophetic that was, and how important that would be to me, because it's a absolutely the solidest advice in life. So many ways to apply it. But I knew it's boom, right over there. That's the one. I'm like, thank you very much. Went over, grabbed it off the wall, and I was in the counter, done it. And I was feeling like I made the right choice in the right place, and I met the right person, and I followed my instincts, and I doubted myself, but I kind of trusted I just trusted that the universe, would the dynamics would work out for me. So I took that guitar to Asia, back to Thailand. I got online, I searched around. I wanted to find a Filipino teacher because they speak really good English, and they have amazing musical talent. I don't know what it is. It's the water or the island or something, but the Filipinos have beautiful voices and amazing musical talent.
I
And I
agree.
met, it's just, it's fact. Right? I mean, it's just facts. And I met this guy called Alonzo, and man, he's still a best friend. And Alonzo and I met, and we were brothers from the day we met. And about the third or fourth or fifth week we got together, he looks at me and he says, we should write a song. You should write a song. I thought, really? Well, I can't even play a chord, right? My fingers hurt. When I strum it, it sounds like garbage. And he's telling me I should write a song. Like, this guy's a lunatic. And after about the third or fourth week of saying that, I realized, I have some writings that I was writing on airplanes, and they're notes. They're chicken scratch. They're chicken scratch in a notebook. But I'll pull those out, and I wrote these notes over, I don't know, 2 or 3 years traveling on airplanes, and I pulled them out. And I hadn't looked at them in 3, 4 years, and the first one I had was faith. So I pulled. It was the one that with the most notes, the most words was his faith, and it was a chapter out of Dear God. And so we pulled these notes out, and I took a highlighter and we started highlighting chorus, verse. Oh, this looks a good verse. This is a good chorus. And before I knew it, we wrote a song called Faith. And it was my first song that we published, and wrote it, published it. And I had no expectations when I thought about playing guitar that I would be a songwriter, that I would help compose, I would be part of a team composing a song. And so there I was, writing a song and singing with this guy, this Filipino. And we ended up writing about six. I think we've got about 6 songs written and published, uh, all from the Dear God book. And it's just an amazing experience, getting through all that, writing the songs and playing guitar. And I'm still a very average, below average player, but I use the guitar as kind of comforting, warmth, loving moment for self. Just kind of just sit there and hold it, and I hold my red guitar, and we just me and her, and we hang out and we play.
um,
Yeah,
the
and
music.
I forgot the
Go
part of
ahead.
the yeah,
Yeah,
I
go
forgot the
ahead.
question I was answering.
Go ahead. So basically, what else happened in your life to get you to podcasting?
Yeah, that's right. Back to the jar. So that ignited. What happened was I wrote these songs and I ran out of words because I hadn't written the book. I had only chicken scratch. And so this inspired me to take the book more serious. So I pulled these all out and I started to construct the book in Thailand. And when I was in India for 1 year, I put the final structure together of the self, others, the all, and the God, and the 12 stories, the 12 letters, the 12 topics, if you will. And that's what I ended up how I ended up writing the book. And then in Vietnam, I came up with the crazy idea to take the book and to use it to create questions for a podcast, because I thought I could do a traveling podcast. It'd be a great way to come back to America, come back to it, because I haven't lived I'm not American anymore. It's 22 years away. I don't know the culture anymore. I don't know the people. I don't know the country. It's different. It's different. It's 20 years later. And so I wrote 444 questions.
Whoa.
I commissioned a good friend of mine to create some jars. And for the audience audio, I'm holding up a jar. As Kimberly can see it, this beautiful glass jar with these lenses on it, and 444 questions inside. And they're life questions about your past, your present, your future, love, karma, service, faith, hope, prayer, all those topics: acceptance, forgiveness, compassion. And I drove around the country, 96 cities over the last 2 years, and interviewed 323 people at the kitchen table, and just throw the jar down in front of them, and they start pulling cards and start answering the questions. And so I just wrapped that show up. I've put it on pause. I want to do 444 interviews, but I put it on pause for a little while, take a break from the road. And so that's where I was at on the jar.
Tell me the psychology. We're going to backtrack a little bit. Tell me the
Yeah.
psychology behind your book and the podcast. Because obviously you had to learn
Hmm.
a little bit of psychology or you already knew psychology.
I didn't know any psychology. This is the best part. I'm I am definitely one of those people that just throws themselves into something, 100%. And I'm not afraid to try something I don't know much about because I know I'll learn along the way. When I set the jar up, the podcast up, Kimberly, I knew a couple of things about myself. One was I've never interviewed anybody. I mean, I've done 1,000 interviews, air quotes, meeting somebody and talking to them and having a conversation and from work, but I've never interviewed as an interview, as an official interview. And I didn't feel at the time that I had the skills to be able to ask intelligent questions, probing questions. My biggest fear was the follow-up question. And I'm sure as a podcaster, you can appreciate this, having to listen to somebody and not knowing when they're going to finish a thought and then being prepared for a good question. It's one of the most
Exactly.
diff
It
it's
is.
one it's a very underrated skill. And I knew it's a skill and I lacked it. And I thought if I did the show this way that I would be able to overcome it because the questions would come from the jar and I didn't have to be the star of the show. Not the star, the guest is the star, but I didn't have to be the driver of it. The jar would take care of that for me. And so that was my kind of my go. Was I had a good plan to back up what I thought was my weakness, and I thought I had a good. It's a beautiful show, and I've met some of the most amazing people. Like we talked about, the people you've interviewed as well. You just walk away just so enriched by our guests, and I'm just a different person. I'm a completely different person when I started the show.
Name some of the people that you've interviewed and which I've talked about on the
Hmm.
show.
Yeah, boy. One of the first guest, I mean, still it's strange. A lot of them are blurred, right? Very blurry. My first guest, Pastor Carl, a good friend, a college friend of mine, brought me to Pastor Carl, and he was the leader of his church. This is up in Washington, and he was such an amazing guest. Like he was so comforting. I interviewed him in his office, beautiful office, and he was such a great guy, just a beautiful human. Um, so Pastor Carl was one, and then I met very shortly after that. I met another guest, and his name is escaping me right now for whatever reason. But it was an interesting. I drove up to a bar. I kind of booked the wrong city. So I had a team helping me coordinate. You can imagine I'm driving from city to city. Every 4 days, I would change cities. And I would, as I would change, I'd have to have guests lined up. And, this was a crazy, crazy schedule I had in the beginning. Every 4 days, interview a day, and then travel and go interview four more people.
I
And
understand.
I pulled into this small town in Washington, and I pulled in and I realized there's not a stoplight in the town. There's only one stop sign, and there's nowhere to eat really except one place called Cooligans. And I pulled into the Cooligans, and it was in Cooley City. So it was it was a funny play on and you just didn't imagine this was a very Irish place, right? It was in the middle of nowhere, the middle of nowhere in Washington State. So there was, I don't know if there's any Irish around, but maybe it was settled by Irish people or something. But Cooligans, and I got in there, and there was this very rough looking character down in the middle of the bar, long beard, kind of not tall, but just kind of sitting in his chair drinking a Corona at 2 in the afternoon. Um, and I walked up to him, and we became good friends. And next thing I knew, I was at his home. I met him in the bar, and 24 hours later, I'm at his house interviewing him.
Wow.
And his wife Kimberly. I can't believe I'm forgetting his name, but an amazing story. And I interviewed him, and then his wife stood up at the end of the interview and said, "That's it. You got to come back tomorrow. You got to interview me." Because I answered every question differently. Like he would pull the question. She was sitting there listening. And at the end of at the end of the whole thing, she's like, "You got to come back tomorrow." So I came back the next night. He cooked dinner, and I interviewed Kim. Um, the name will come to me a little bit later. Anyway, so that was a great interview. Let's see some of the other ones that I interviewed so that were so impactful. Escaping me right now. Boy, that one put me on this. That one really wrecked my memory.
It's okay. Take your
Yeah,
time. What cities have you been to? Just follow the cities. Like,
yeah, yeah. So what I did was I started in the Pacific Northwest in Washington, and then I just went when I was planning the trip. I planned it with every capital state, the capital city of each state. So that gave me 48. I was obviously not going to Hawaii or Alaska. So I had 48. I had 48, not in the van. I had 48 states, so 48 state capitals. So that was the plan, to go to every state capital and then add one more city in the state. And, and that gets me up around 100, gets me close to 100. And I was going to do 111 cities. And so I just
wow.
had to add, just some like California, you can do 4 or 5 cities, Texas, 4 or 5 cities, you know, in some of these other big states you can do. Massachusetts, you might do just one. Delaware, I just did one. So it was an opportunity to really see. I saw every state capital, been to every state capital now. It was a fantastic journey. So that was kind of how I did that was how I kind of did the plan.
Did you go to
Um,
Barbara? Did you ever
I
reach
have,
Santa Barbara?
yeah, you're in Santa Maria, right? Yeah.
I was in Santa Maria. Yeah, great old Santa Maria.
I love that area.
Yes, it's
I
nice and quiet.
I'd like to live there actually. I think at some point. Um, I have not made it in California. I got all the way. So I went all the way up the north, right, and a bit of a zigzag, a little bit down, a little bit up, a little bit down, a little bit up, all the way to Maine, and then I went from Maine down the eastern seaboard, in a bit, bit west, a bit east, a bit west, so a zigzaggy down to Florida, and then I started going through the south, through the deep south, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi. I love the South. I went to school in South Carolina, so I love the South. I just so identify with the food, the people, the culture. I just love it. I had some of my best. Um, oh, I'm gonna find his name. That was one of my best interviews. Um, I did an interview, and this gentleman was so good. It was Mississippi, and he got up at 4 in the morning to barbecue some ribs and some corn. What else did we have? We had something else. I forget what the other dish was, but man, Kimberly, he cooked honestly the best ribs I've ever had. He had some. It was like pine. I can't remember eucalyptus or pine. It was pine, not pine. He used this kind of old school technique. You can't burn the wood, but you can somehow get the smoke out. I don't quite understood what he was doing, but man, it was like amazing. And he's like, people don't do this because if you do it wrong, you ruin the meat. He's
Yeah.
like, so you only cook like this if you know what you're doing. I was like, Purtis Williams, and
Oh,
we met Purtis at kind of a youth center he was building for youth in the local area. It was tough part of town. I gotta be honest. Those are the parts where you see where the black community has really been fooked. It was a food desert. The only restaurants around were all these garbage fast food stuff, corporate terrible food. The four restaurants would be like, Bojangles, McDonald's, Jack in the Box, and, some other garbage restaurant. And, not that hopefully none of those are our sponsors. Um,
go
but
ahead, go ahead.
yeah, I just keep going. Just pretend that didn't happen. But it was a food desert. No real grocery stores, for a couple miles. And if you're a low income person, you don't have a car. You're not and certainly not a car you're going to be driving to the other side of town. And let alone when you get there, what can you afford? And just looked around and said, man, some of that was rough. But Curtis was just the biggest, warmest heart. I came back the next day just to hang out uh, and meet his partner and meet some of the people involved in the project he was working on. He was a real brother. I mean, we were like instant brothers. Curtis, that's one name that just jumps out. I can't forget him. And like I said, the best barbecued ribs I've ever had, and I've eaten some barbecue ribs. Uh,
Can you tell me about your we're gonna keep backtracking. Can you tell me about the people that you were speaking in front of? You met a lot of pretty cool people.
mm,
Tell me about your first speaking event.
yeah, in Asia.
Cool.
Yeah,
It had
boy,
to be hard. Like
and
the culture is different.
I totally remember it, right? I totally remember it. So I had this regional role, a role as a regional person, and kind of what that is like a national person, like you're in New York City, right? And you're in charge of the country, but there's people in every state that run this state, and so you're in charge, but you're not really on the ground. You're just kind of overseeing work and checking work and kind of maybe designing strategy, but you're not really responsible for much in the end. And and when I left Hong Kong, the company said, "Look, we want you to go to Vietnam and become the head of sales." And we had about 60,000 salespeople at the time. It was a big company, big sales team, and I was very excited. And I had spoken. I'd gotten on stage here and there and done some introductions or done a short speech somewhere, but nothing memorable really. Just work stuff. Like it didn't feel like it was me speaking to in a Ken Stearns moment. I was really representing the company, and so all of a sudden here I am. I'm taking over this distribution role. And I remember going to the event and getting there, and there's like 1,500 people crammed into this space. And there's a stage and the lights, and all the hoorah going on. And there's the dancers, and then this comes on and this comes on, and then it's gonna be,
Whoa.
and then it's you, and you're gonna give a speech. And I do remember getting the microphone and just looking there, and just everybody is staring at you. Like 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 I've got something intelligent to say, like more intelligent than there's people out there way smarter than me. What am I doing up here? What am I gonna tell them? And it is interesting. You do get that where you're just a little bit awestruck by the moment. And it's great you asked the question because it's burned into my memory. Getting that microphone handed to me, I can almost it felt like it weighed about 100 pounds. When they give it to you that first time and you're on the stage, you just look out and you're like, boy, I hope I just don't stop speaking. I hope I don't just lose my cool. Um, but yeah, that was a big moment. And then the other one was in front of 12,000 people. And looking out, and as we're preparing and before we open the doors and let everybody in, and all the preparations on the stage is just gigantic, and there's like huge screens you cannot imagine the size, so everybody can see in the back, and screens all the way down. But to walk down the main aisle, and to get all the way to see all these empty chairs and get all the way in the back and look at the front and go, whoa, I'm going to be on that stage speaking to these people. This is crazy.
Was your family proud of you?
Yeah, I think so. My brothers, my friends, um, kids, even my ex-wife, my ex-wife, I think is, kind of proud to have been, in a relationship with me, and, produce a couple of good kids, and also to be part of that Asian experience for 12 years. We were together in Asia. Um, yeah, and family. And I did just have my good friend's wife. I was just with them, stayed with them for a few days, and she said, I want you to know before you go that Charlie is, you know, just so in love with you. He's so proud of you to know you as a friend, and he's just talks about you all the time, and what you do. So it is that warm feeling when you look and know your friends care about you, respect you, what you've done.
Yeah. You deserve a round of applause for
Oh,
that,
thank
y'all.
you.
And where do you see yourself going for the future?
It's a great question, Kimberly. I'm really excited right now. I've had this this idea, to try not to force things, to let life unfold in a way, right? So we have goals and we have dreams, and I think it's important to hold those in a frame, but not be the bullseye target. So we can shape some of it, but you're not always going to hit that bullseye, and you can't try and force stuff. You have to let it kind of come to you. And I think where I'm looking now is a couple of things. I moved to Portland. So I've been 2 years. I think one thing we didn't share with the audience is, I landed in January 2022, and I have been staying in hotels, Airbnbs, and friends and families' homes for 2 years. Everything I've needed, I've put in a van, and I have in two suitcases. And honestly, almost I'm down to one suitcase is all I need, and maybe one box of stuff. I've lived in beautiful homes. I've lived in big apartments with lots of stuff. I had a tool for everything, a fork for this, a knife for that, a pan for this, a fancy coffee maker. But in the end, I'm free from everything. I'm free from money. I'm free from adulations, from recognition. I've really spent time coming to coming to a comfortable place with who I am in my own self, in my own body. I spent a lot of time alone over the couple of years, and a lot of time with super intense conversations with people, hearing the most dreadful human stories you can imagine, but laced with
Tell me
and
one.
really
Tell
flowered
me
with.
one.
Yeah, I was at a I was going to a library. I was interviewing somebody at a library.
Hmm.
And I'm gonna forget that it was Nebraska. I believe it was Nebraska. There's a public library. I was going to have an interview there, and I had forgot something in the van. And I went back out to the van. So I'd met the guest and I was in the library and had everything there. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I forgot something. I'm going to run out. So I ran out to the van, and when I had locked the door and I was walking away, this lady says, "Hey, hey, hey, I saw your van." And I looked up the jar. I want to be a guest. I thought, okay, sure. Here's my card. Call, message me, send me a message, and I'll fit you in. And so, and she did. She actually messaged me, and I met her at her home, and she was a Native American descent, um, and the story of her growing up with her mom and her dad in and out, and the violence that was brought upon her by the people in her life, family and non-family, was really hard to take. And the drugs, the alcohol, the stuff she was doing when she was 11 years old, um, just hurt me to my soul. Hearing the story, that somebody could go through this stuff, and that she'd come out the other side such a well-adjusted human and a mom, that she was able to say, it stops with me. I will never let my children experience what I experienced. I won't let that happen. It stops right here with this generation. Boom, it's over. And I will end this cycle. And, it was just hearing too a bit of the American native story, the American native story. And I said Indian, but it's American natives. And man, it's tough. That was a tough one. And I also had an encounter with somebody who I think was possessed. I honestly, possessed was the only word, or just evil, or hard to say exactly what it was. But this person, she had talked about being kicked in the womb. She could remember it. Remember being her father drop kicked her when she was an infant in the hospital, and he was arrested. Uh, and that was a really disturbing. It took me a couple of months to get that interview out of my soul. I felt like almost part of her demons attached to me in the conversation because it's so intimate. We're very close. We touch the jar. There's a lot of transference that happens in these energy transference. And because you're physically there, right? You're physically there in the room with the person, and the energy was demonic.
And you said that you do a lot of things alone. And
Hmm.
how do you keep your mental health up and going?
Yeah. I don't know, honestly. I don't, it's like a real, and I've actually wondered that. I for sure there were I think for sure I went through some of my own little bits of depression, alone, aloneness, not and maybe not depression, but
Me too.
um,
You're not alone.
yeah, yeah. I don't know if I guess you'd call it depression, but I certainly went into some times when I was withdrawn and doing the show, but not communicating outside the basic fundamentals of doing. All I could do was to do the show, and it was still a lot traveling, making my arrangements, paying the bills, managing a team, preparing for the interview, doing the interview, coming back to the hotel and trying to do some production or do some other work around the show. And I think so some of that withdrawing would be depression, would be the only way. So I think, but I had somewhere to be and I had a mission. So I think the overall, maybe a good advice for people, for me looking back, is I had a grander, bigger thing that I was doing. I was I was supposed to do this, and I had committed that I was doing this, and I think that helped me to keep going and to push past, any negative thoughts or any depression that I might be going through.
Do you have any like hobbies like walking and
Playing
anything?
guitar,
Playing
Play,
guitar?
playing
Yeah.
guitar is a good, and writing and getting back. I have a dear the original the original book was Dear Dad. My father died when I was 27ish,
Sorry to hear that.
and yeah, it's a tough time to lose your dad. He was older. He was older, and um, as I looked back, especially in my corporate career when I was in Asia on the airplanes, I started writing these things, these dear dad letters, and because there's dear dad, I got promoted. Dear dad, I'm in Asia. Your son is, I'm a baller in Asia running around. I got this cool insurance job, dad. He would have been so proud. Dear dad, I got fired. I, I don't even know how I'm going to pay my bills. Holy shit. I could lose everything. Holy cow. You know, so there's moments you would,
It's
those
okay.
moments, those moments that you would want to call your father. I didn't have those chances. And, and I thought, what a great way to do it for myself would be to write these letters down. And I'm sure I would not be the only person who would have those same experiences and same emotions. And so I've got that book. That one's Cooking, Dear Dad.
Do you think that you would be so you have Dear God, I think you have
Dear Dad.
Dear God, and
Oh,
now is it
okay.
Dear Dad? Just Dear Dad? The only book?
One more is Ken's Rules.
Ken's Rule. So do
So I
you
have
think
a
that you'll be
corporate
coming
book.
out with a new book soon?
I'm going to come out with a book this year. I'm going to make it a little easier on myself, and I'm going to do the Ken's Rules in 4 parts, and I will do the first 4 rules. I'll come up with 12 rules, and corporate. I'll do business rules first. Business rules first, and one of them is fun. All of them have analogies, and some of them are Asian based. So team building, for example, I named my team building one after a seafood, a hot spicy seafood dish in Thailand. That you could go to a restaurant here in Thailand or here in America, a Thai restaurant. It's called Tom Yum Goon, and
Tom
it's this,
Younger.
yeah, Tom Yum, and it's a it's it's a very interesting. It's served breakfast, lunch, or dinner. It's from the north of the country to the south of the country, but you'll never taste it the same in any place. It's always different, but it's always in balance. Sometimes it's a little chili, sometimes it's a little spicy, sometimes a little sour, sometimes a little creamy. from the coconut milk, and sometimes it's got a little bit of extra lime and a little bit more acidic. And it's like team building, Kimberly. Everything needs to be in balance, right? You can't be all chili peppers, right? Or it can't be all lemongrass. It has to be a good balance between all of these flavors. And team building is the same way. And as the chef, as the manager, the leader, you need to ensure that you got a good diversity of food of ingredients, and that those are in balance and they're not out of balance. And you don't put too much of one thing in there or you spoil the dish. And it's but the chef has the freedom on how to create that dish so it's the most beautiful experience for the guest or for the team.
Okay. And how can the if you had one piece of advice before I say how can the people
Hmm.
reach you, but one piece of advice to give to you have 2 minutes to give a piece of advice to the
Yeah,
entrepreneur that is out there.
the
Shoot.
entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Do it. Don't, I think plans are great, and planning to a certain extent is helpful. You should be thoughtful, but there comes a time you have to do it, and you'll learn along the way. You can adjust your course. So, one of my rules is momentum. And momentum is all about getting the ball rolling and moving. You can take an F 150, you can take a 1976 F 150 truck, hook a train up to it, and you can pull that train. You can start a freight train with an F 150 truck. You can get it going. And then you can turn that F 150 around, and you can't stop that train. So, momentum is your most important thing in business. Get going, get started, get momentum, adjust course along the way, but you got to get going. Momentum is your friend.
Thank you. How can the people find you?
Yeah, the easiest way to find me still is thejar.live. www.thejar.live is a great place to find the show, the main show, find out more about me, the book. And also, I'm on LinkedIn. I've done several podcasts, so I'm pretty Googleable at this point in my life. I can say you can Google me and find out more about me. But LinkedIn and thejar.live are really great places.
Okay, I want to thank you guys for listening in, my viewers. Thank you, Mr. Stearns, for being there and telling your life story. It was an amazing experience with you.
Thank you, Kimberly, so much. I really appreciate the opportunity.
I like to de escalate and basically stay on the line for me, Captain Ken
Mm.
Stearns, and y'all take care, okay? Bye bye.